my grandson also runs this company. We don't think of the company as a whole. We don't think of the other stakeholders. We don't get their interests aligned with the company's interests.
Right.
The result is the companies remain small.
Yeah.
You know, in the 1960s, early 1960s, Japanese companies were no bigger than our companies here.
Right.
The Japanese salaries were no more than our salaries here. I went to
That's
Japan.
quite a startling fact. Honestly, I wasn't aware.
1960. I had been to Japan. 61.
Right.
60, I think. And I met some engineers from Hitachi. They took me to Hitachi City, but their salary was actually lower than what our engineers were earning here. And this was in 1960, and see what's happened.
Yeah.
And it's happened because there is a long-term vision that if you grow the institution,
Right.
you will automatically grow and benefit. If you only look for your benefit, it won't happen to that extent. And if you look at any of the institutions in India, you'll find that true. The institutions which have grown or the companies which have grown,
people have done well.
Are where people have done well, and there has been no personal agenda. So I think in India, if there's one lesson which we need to learn, that's this one. And there are lots of other lessons, of course, about how things should be done. But
So
that's
we have to have a separate talk with you on the host of other lessons for people who want to do business in Japan.
There's a lot to learn. And that it can be learned is also clear because in Maruti, we have managed a lot of the things which the Japanese do. And I think if Maruti is where it is today, you know, we have grown from where we were without any funds coming in from anywhere, all through internal sources, from 100,000 units to 1.5 million units. Plus, we have some 14,000 or 15,000 crores in the bank. Now, who has managed this in India? And how has it been managed?
Oh, it's a phenomenal story. Actually, that takes me to another question. That when you look back and think about what were the key strategic choices you made at that point. You talked about some of the leadership choices, but in terms of the business choices, what were the key choices you made which put Maruti in such a dominant position for such a long time? You know, it's not often you find an example of a company which gets this kind of dominance in a marketplace and sustains it for decades.
We had an initial advantage.
Right.
So when we started, the only competition was Hindustan Motors and Premier Automobile.
Right.
And in terms of technology and manufacturing practices, they were decades behind.
Right.
The first good choice we made, I think, was to make partnership with Suzuki.
Right.
And it must be said...
That was an unusual decision for a government car company, right?
It was a much more unusual decision for a Japanese company to partner with government. Because government was desperate at that time to get a partner to make a car. And in Japan, normally decisions for making investments are done after a great deal of due diligence, and they study the market, and they study the whole industry and the component makers, and it takes a process. It may go on for a year and a half. In this case, Mr. Suzuki decided to become a partner in Maruti with the government. One meeting in Japan, and I asked him several years later, I said, look, what you did was just unacceptable to the Japanese itself, because in the Japanese media and press and industry, people wrote that this is the beginning of the end of Suzuki. He's taken this decision just like this. So his answer was that when I met Mr. Krishnamurti and you, my gut told me that I can work with these guys. So I decided that I'll work with you people. That's all.
Fascinating.
He didn't do any kind of due diligence. Nothing. He knew nothing about the automobile industry in India. He didn't know about public sector. He didn't know about what our planning process is. Nothing.
Right.
But he said, these two guys are people I can work with, so let's get on with it.
So other than getting a Japanese technology partner, Do you think the focus on small cars was
See,
good
small
strategic
cars
choice?
was given to us.
Okay.
Where when we started this
As part of the
project,
policy
this was a successor to
Yeah.
Sanjay's failed
Yeah,
project.
yeah, yeah.
And that time it was a people's car.
Right, right,
In fact, the government was going away from it before we came on the scene.
right.
The government was handling this project and there was a custodian and they were doing this project. They had picked a 1.8 liter Renault car for manufacturing. And Renault had set up an office in India and they were all set. I think the Minister of Heavy Industry, Channa, got sacked because of that. Because when this whole thing came out and how it was done and what had gone behind it, I think he lost his job. So I think that small car was certainly the right choice. After 10 years, Suzuki felt that we should move away from small cars to bigger cars.
Right.
Because they said, look, this is what's happening in the rest of the world. People graduate to bigger cars. And they wanted to discontinue the Maruti 800.
Right.
But that's when I put my foot down. I said, look, that's not true of India.
Yeah.
Maybe true of the rest of the world, but India will not move the way other countries have moved to big cars because of various reasons, infrastructure, cost, or value for money kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. So there was quite a discussion and ultimately we had to go to Mr. Suzuki because I told Mr. Suzuki that your vice president doesn't agree. He wants to discontinue. I can't agree with that. So I'm willing to quit.
Right.
So Mr. Suzuki said, look, I wouldn't have called you here if I wanted you to quit. No, we'll continue with it. And he overruled his vice president and that was the end of the story. So we continued with the small cars. And I think now, when all these other car makers came to India, they all came again with the same belief that India is bound to move to bigger cars. All of them are now moving to small cars.
So do you think the future is still going to be in small cars, or as India becomes more affluent, that mix is going to change?
See, the infrastructure in India doesn't support big cars. And the city infrastructure is not going to become like Chinese infrastructure because the political compulsions of India do not allow that kind of city remodeling to happen.
Right.
We will remain with these narrow roads and limited parking and all of that. So that's going to be the biggest factor.
That's going to need.
Biggest factor for small cars in India. Plus the fact that nowhere in the world, do people have 15 million motorcycles and scooters sold every year. All these people use it for commuting, not for sports. It's a vehicle for their family, not a vehicle of choice.
So they're going to migrate up.
It's a vehicle and they're all aspiring to move up. We are 160, 170 million owners of two-wheelers.
So as we look at the demand situation in India right now for cars, rural was driving a lot of the growth for a couple of years, but now rural growth seems to have slowed down a bit with this whole Ola, Uber phenomena. What implication does it have for urban demand for cars? And therefore, what do you see as the market for cars over the next decade?
See, I think in the cities, in areas in cities where it is very crowded and parking is difficult. At the moment, of course, parking is free almost in India. Nobody charges for parking. I can't see that remaining for long. But when there is a reasonable parking fee, people will hesitate to take their personal cars for work or to crowded areas for shopping.
So will that slow down the demand for cars in urban
markets? No, they'll still have a car for other areas and their leisure activities.
Right.
You look at New York, for example. If you go to Manhattan, you'll take a taxi.
That's true.
But if you have to go anywhere else, you
still go in your car on the weekend.
You can't help that.
That's true. That's very true, actually. So that's an interesting take on the whole Uber, Ola discussion.
So these will grow. I think Uber and Olas and all will grow. But they won't make any significant impact
on the marketplace.
People wanting to own their own cars.
And what about all this new innovation around electric cars, self-drive cars? Do you think that's going to come to India in a big way, and in what way do you see it coming to India?
The government thinks electric cars are a good thing for India.
Right.
And there's a lot of money being put into electric cars.
Yeah.
My personal belief is that electric cars in India will remain only a niche product.
Right.
The reason is that there is no infrastructure.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.